Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're plunging into something really shaping the future. Europe's growing unease about its deep reliance on U.S. tech giants.
It's a huge topic. We've sifted through quite a stack of reports and policies to get to the heart of it.
Exactly. We want to unpack why Europe is worried and, importantly, what they're trying to do about it. Our mission. Find those key nuggets of knowledge for you.
Let's dive in.
Okay, so the core concern. It jumps out when you see the numbers. Something like 92% of European data, it sits in U.S. company cloud infrastructure.
92%.
Yeah.
That's staggering. And it's not just where the data is, it's about the foundation of their digital economy being, well, hosted abroad.
Right. Potentially subject to another country's laws.
Precisely. And that directly exposes Europe to U.S. laws like the Cloud Act and FISA. These allow the U.S. government to access data, basically regardless of where it's physically stored.
Which impacts your data privacy, potentially?
Absolutely. This was central to that big 2020 Schrems II ruling. It struck down the old Privacy Shield agreement because, fundamentally, U.S. privacy protections weren't seen as strong enough compared to the EU's GDPR standards.
Okay, so data vulnerability is one piece. But then there's the market itself. It's so concentrated. You've got Microsoft, Amazon, Google, holding what, 72%?
72%, yes, just 3 companies. Think about that from a risk perspective.
What does that mean practically for, say, a European startup or even public services?
Well, it creates this massive potential single point of failure for critical digital services. If something happens with one of those major providers, the ripple effect could be enormous.
And there are geopolitical fears too, right?
Leverage.
Definitely. There's even been speculation really, about things like a potential kill switch on military tech, like the F-35 fighter jets. It highlights how technological dependency becomes a national security concern.
So, data, security. But what about the economic side? This reliance must be holding Europe back in terms of innovation. It seems to be. Europe still depends heavily on foreign tech, especially in key areas like semiconductors. And their R&D spending, as a share of GDP, it just lags behind the U.S. and China.
The EU is at 2.2%, while the U.S. is 3.5%.
Exactly. And that gap matters. While Europe is, quite advanced in regulating tech, think DMA, DSA, the AI Act.
Right, setting the rules.
Yes. But that regulatory strength alone doesn't automatically create a thriving domestic tech industry. You need the industrial capacity to back it up.
And we're seeing friction there too, aren't we? Between the EU rules and the big tech companies, like Meta and X pushing back.
Oh, absolutely. It's become quite ideological. You have U.S. officials sometimes accusing Europe of, say, censoring speech or even threatening things like visa bans over regulatory demands.
So a real clash of digital governance philosophies.
It really highlights a fundamental disagreement. The U.S. often frames it as protectionism or hindering innovation, while the EU sees it as vital for protecting citizens, protecting you, and ensuring digital self-determination.
Okay, so given all these concerns, what's the plan? What's Europe actually doing?
They're trying to be proactive. There's the Digital Decade program. It sets some really ambitious targets for 2030.
Like training 20 million ICT specialists and getting 75% of companies using advanced tech, doubling semiconductor market share.
Yeah, big goals. It's framed as this comprehensive, values-driven vision for a digital future centered on people.
Is it? Is it realistic, though? Or more aspirational?
Well, underpinning it are concrete legislative actions. We mentioned the GDPR, DMA, DSA, the AI Act, and now the European Chips Act. These are all meant to shape the digital space and boost homegrown capabilities.
And projects like Gaia X.
Exactly. Gaia X is interesting. It's not about building one giant European cloud to rival AWS or Azure. It's more about creating standards for federated interoperable systems. The focus is on data sovereignty, making sure your data stays under European rules and control, even if the infrastructure involves different players.
But there are still major hurdles. The European Commission itself admitted they're nowhere near self-sufficiency. Decoupling entirely isn't realistic, they said.
No, it isn't. And the funding gap is stark. European growth companies raised, $46 billion in 2023? Compare that to $122 billion in the U.S.
Wow, that's a huge difference.
It really is. And that disparity makes it tough for European tech companies to scale up and compete globally. Less homegrown innovation.
And internal divisions within the EU don't help either.
That's another major challenge. You see disagreements, especially between, say, France and Germany, on key things like building out high-speed networks or the energy needed for data centers.
Which makes a unified strategy difficult.
Precisely. That kind of fragmentation hinders a cohesive industrial policy. And the risk, as some analyses point out, is that Europe ends up being treated like a geopolitical pawn between the US and China.
Geopolitical pawn, that really lands the stakes involved here. Okay, so to wrap this up, Europe is on this complex path, trying to balance achieving more strategic independence while staying globally connected.
Right, trying to match its regulatory leadership with stronger industrial muscle and needing more internal unity to really make it happen.
So as we leave you to think about this, what does this deep dive into Europe's quest for digital sovereignty mean for your own digital future? And how might this push for technological autonomy reshape the global landscape for innovation and data?